Our speaker is Gabriele Rosato from the Institute of Anthropology, Pontifical Gregorian University, Italy. Today, he presents his talk on the topic, Dating After Trauma from Childhood Abuse, How Survivors Navigate Romantic Relationships.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gabriele Rosato, and I am a cultural anthropologist from Italy. I am a research fellow at the Institute of Anthropology, which is part of the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. And now I'm truly excited to present at the current conference on love studies. In particular, today I am sharing with you a few results of my current research, which focuses on the long-term effects of childhood trauma through an anthropological lens. More in detail, the title of my presentation is Dating After Trauma: How Survivors of Childhood Abuse Navigate Romantic Relationships. But before I begin, please, I want to share a brief content advisory, as this talk discusses childhood sexual abuse and its long-term impact on survivors. Well, some descriptions may be emotionally challenging. So if at any point the material makes you feel overwhelmed, well, please feel free to step out or practice self-care as needed. And now, well, I may say something obvious, yet whose implications are not so obvious. Which is, dating is tough, isn't it? It can be challenging for everyone. However, it can be particularly difficult and challenging for survivors of childhood abuse, whose romantic dimension of intimacy is particularly problematic, as abusers often disguised sexual acts as expressions of love. And this observation is at the heart of the study, and also behind the interpretation of the stories I've come into contact with. Now, when speaking of traumatic events, I must stress that they are not peculiar to a small population. Now, on the contrary, this phenomenon affects many more people than we would expect. Then trauma can and does affect everyone, and we need to factor this understanding into discussions from across fields, from mental health support to platform design for dating apps and so on. Now, while a significant piece of research exists on the mental health repercussions of childhood abuse, well, far less attention has been devoted to how these histories affect survivors' day-to-day experiences in dating contexts, for example. So, dating, which involves intimacy, vulnerability, and the pursuit of emotional and physical closeness, well, all of these is precisely where many survivors continue to grapple with the lingering effects of early trauma. And a key reason is that many perpetrators disguise abusive actions as loving gestures, creating profound confusion for survivors. And then for a child who is just forming, a sense of what love means, having sexual abuse framed as caring behavior can severely distort the understanding of genuine affection and intimacy as a whole. Now, my fieldwork consisted of a year-long exchange with 30 individuals ranging in age from 18 to 55 who are survivors of childhood abuse. And from a methodological point of view, my research, which is grounded in cultural anthropology, utilizes qualitative interviews, on-site observations, and visual ethnography. But a peculiar feature of my methodology was the use of verbal maps, detailing, which areas are associated with safety or danger, and explaining why with their own words. So these autoethnographic reflections helped participants articulate emotional danger zones or safe havens, if so, shedding light on how early trauma reconfigures the way they perceive and engage with romantic spaces. So altogether, the combined methods allowed me, as a scholar, to explore not just what survivors did in their dating lives, but also how they felt about it. Now, this presentation builds on a broader ethnographic inquiry, but here I'm concentrating on the dating dimension to highlight how survivors experienced all of these, both online and in digital environments. For instance, several participants illustrated how childhood abuse, presented once, as I was saying, as love by their abusers, distorted their ability to trust later when adults. For example, one interviewee mentioned having an absurd fear of being manipulated, rooted in the manipulative traits of the parents, in that case, which were co-abusers. So the woman I was talking to told me that she tends to seek out people I cannot have. She told me. So, remarking a deep-seated fear of truly letting go and fall in love at the end of the day. So, despite using dating apps in that case, she often rushes into meeting people in person, acknowledging that her love expectations stem from her traumatic past. Another participant, for example, described a pattern of tying herself to what she called toxic people. So she explained that when her relationships seem healthy, she becomes anxious because she can't understand why they would love her. So this mistrust of positive emotional experiences is emblematic of how trauma warps a survivor's, sense of worthiness and safety in relationships. So this person usually leads to the conclusion that if all goes well, then I can trust, which is very common, widespread within the interviewees. Now, let's see how the interviewed survivors approach dating potential new partners online. So while some participants appreciated the ability to set the pace of online contact, others avoid dating apps entirely. Look, one interviewee said, "It makes me anxious to build a relationship through chat. And again, I wouldn't know how to speak in person with someone I met online." So this duality underscores that what feels empowering for one survivor can be intimidating or even overwhelming for another. And still on the subject of online dating, one participant who had been abused in his youth told me about his struggles to identify his sexual orientation once he started to feel attraction for other people. He basically sought out sexual experiences with men via a dating app, believing that he had to replicate, that's what they told me, to replicate the dynamics of the abuse. So he basically concealed his identity, the identity online, of course, and felt confused during this phase. So this anonymity, if so, made possible by digital platform, made also possible to explore in secret what he calls the desires tied to the unresolved trauma. And on the other hand, another interviewee found dating apps to be literally deadly bore, described the initial online conversation as tedious. So this participant, in this case, for example, preferred to provoke interest subtly and in person, and then wait for the other person to make the first move, reflecting a reluctance to actively pursue connection, possibly another boundary shaped by past experiences of abuse. So she believes it is because, taking the first step reinforces the comments she used to hear when her relatives told her that she was the one that sought that abuse. And now we see what is involved when dating is an opportunity to reclaim the self. I give an example from one participant who spoke of being highly sought after. So, which means that she enjoys the flattery, but at the same time, she seeks out much older partners. And she described depicting what a so-called Lolita persona, just quoting her words, so prior to processing the trauma. And it is something that she traced back to a sort of internalizing what men like from her own abusers. Again, according to her own words. So, in hindsight, she viewed her seductive behavior as a learned coping mechanism, simultaneously empowering and rooted in trauma. Another interviewee shared feeling dirty especially after casual encounters, as it reinforced hurtful names her mother used against her. Her mother was co-abuser, acted as co-abuser within that trauma. So she still avoids long-term relationships because they remind her of the prolonged abusive dynamic with her father, which was the main abuser. So she concluded, my body won't belong to anyone else, to anyone but me, highlighting a conflicted stance where she rejects extended commitment but also longs to reclaim bodily autonomy. And last but not least, participant observation showed how CSA survivors articulate and navigate their intimate spaces as adults. And look, the significance of physical and digital spaces emerged in really creative ways. Have a look. One participant told they felt their shared apartment was cursed because, according to their words, no one hooks up there. And so, with the intention of unlocking sexual energy, they and their roommate performed a sort of purification, so rituals, burning Palo Santo, rosemary, and so on, after consulting an online chatbot. And please, noteworthy is that the compulsive use of AI chatbots as a means of coping, as in this case, was documented in several individuals, by the way. So, I dare say, while a sort of humorous on the surface, these rituals echoed a broader theme of survivor transforming spaces tied to feelings of stagnation or negativity. So there is more than the surface, okay? So, finally, the same participant created a dedicated Instagram account for their household. It is called Casa Gold, where Casa translates home, and so it is named after a premium dating app feature. And this was made in the attempt to, personify the apartment and their tenants. Now, the interviewee commented on their tendency to consult Instagram and then to constantly post what they feel on social media. They said they can take a digital detox because they need to prove that something actually happened through the public communication. So this, in a way, drive for public validation revealed a deeper emotional reliance on external acknowledgement to combat lingering insecurities. It's also showing how digital platforms can be both empowering and emotionally risky for trauma survivors. Okay, I'm closing this representation with one of the many practical implications I learned from this experience, some safety tips for online dating apps. Modern dating platforms have changed how people meet and interact, but also they can be a source of re-traumatization. So, here are some tips. 1. Don't feel rushed to meet in person. 2. It's okay to disclose one's past. Actually, some survivors were worried that they were in a way burdening potential partners by sharing their abuse. 3. It's crucial to know one's emotional and physical limits. Then communicate these boundaries to potential partners. So saying no to something people are not comfortable with is particularly tough for those who couldn't say no to child abuse. Again, red flags can take many forms. So from uncomfortable language to inconsistent behaviors. Please listen to gut feelings. 5. Interestingly, survivors noted that positive events like someone being unexpectedly kind or generous could also act as triggers because they echo the so-called honeymoon phases of the abusive cycle. 6. It's never taken for granted, but please seek support. It's okay, valid, and often essential. And finally, there is no universal timeline for trust or intimacy. So trauma recovery is deeply individual. So while these tips apply to many of us, of course, they are particularly relevant for those who've experienced trauma. After all, healing takes time, and being patient and compassionate with oneself throughout the journey is also essential. Okay, my time is up, but you can learn more through my channels and by staying in touch. So please, let's strive to make spaces safer and more supportive for everyone. And now, if you're feeling comfortable, please take part in this debate with kindness. Thank you so much for your attention.